The Arnolfini Portrait by Jan van Eyck isn't exactly the kind of painting you'd see hanging in someone's living room, unless that someone enjoys being watched by a couple frozen in time, with eyes that seem just a little too aware. It has that eerie stillness, like they know something you don't, but that unsettling feeling is exactly what pulls you in, because once you start looking closer, it becomes a puzzle. Every detail, from the way the light hits the chandelier to that tiny reflection in the mirror, is loaded with meaning. And that's Van Eyck's genius. He painted a whole world inside one frame. And like any good mystery, the more you dig, the more it gives. So let's get those digging shoes onto our digging... cats? And find out what it is about this painting that keeps audiences coming back for more. The symbols, the setting, the quiet tension, it all builds into something bigger. But to understand how remarkable it really is, we need to go back to the very beginning. One of the first things that jumps out, if you're a bit of a Renaissance nerd, and boy howdy we know some of you are, is the date. 1434. That's seriously early. To put it into perspective, Botticelli wouldn't even be born for another decade. And yet, here's Van Eyck casually painting one of the most detailed and technically advanced works of the entire era. The surface still shines, the colours are rich, and it hasn't aged like most 600-year-old things tend to. That lasting glow, that's oil paint doing its thing. This piece is one of the earliest and finest examples of oil painting we have. Before this, most artists were working with egg tempera, which dried fast and could be tricky. But oil? Oil gave Van Eyck time to play. He could layer, blend, build depth. It's part of what makes this painting feel so alive. And while Giorgio Vasari, yes, that Vasari, treacherous bloody, loved to say that Van Eyck invented oil painting, that's probably a bit of a stretch. More likely Van Eyck didn't invent the recipe, but he absolutely perfected it. Like the guy at the party who didn't bring the cake, but decorated it so well you forgot who baked it in the first place. No, really, we had an office party like that. Van Eyck turned oil paint into something luminous, layered and lasting, and nowhere is that more clear than in the Arnolfini Portrait. But here's where things get even more interesting. It's not just the technique that has people talking, it's the scene itself, because for years this painting has been labelled the Arnolfini wedding, and that might be totally wrong. At first glance it does look like some kind of marriage moment, the formal poses, the holding of hands, the presence of a witness, Van Eyck himself, clearly reflected in the mirror at the back. It all seems to line up. Some even suggested the painting was meant to serve as a kind of legal document, proving the event happened, with the artist as the witness. Sounds really neat. But the deeper you go, the more cracks begin to show. In the 15th century, betrothal ceremonies didn't include the bride at all, just the men and the families making agreements. Bloody typical. And if this were a wedding portrait, the bride's hair would typically be worn down to symbolise virginity, not tucked up beneath a veil. You can see that traditional style clearly in Van Eyck's Virgin of Canon van der Pale, painted just a couple of years later. And then there's the room itself. It doesn't match what you'd expect for a high society wedding setting. There's no fireplace, no clear sign of a bed or warmth. It doesn't exactly scream nuptial chamber, which has led some to wonder, was this a secret marriage? A rushed or private ceremony? Technically legal, but socially unnecessary for a wealthy couple like the Arnolfinis. So if it's not a wedding, then what is it? Well, this is where things take a darker turn, because once you start looking closely, it feels less like a celebration and more like a memorial, and that's where the clues start creeping in. Quiet, subtle, and scattered throughout the painting like a trail of breadcrumbs left by Van Eyck himself. It's widely accepted that the man in the portrait is Giovanni da Niccolao Arnolfini, but the woman next to him makes the story strange. She's believed to be his wife, Costanza, but here's the catch. Costanza died young, at just 20 years old, and the timeline matters because her death happened before this painting was created, which means Van Eyck may have painted her after she died. A posthumous portrait showing Giovanni standing beside his late wife, alive and ghostly at the same time. Suddenly the painting's stillness feels heavier. The moment starts to feel like a frozen goodbye, not a romantic milestone. Now, Van Eyck often painted women with softly rounded bellies. It was a Renaissance way of hinting at fertility. But in this case, there's a real possibility that Costanza was actually pregnant and may have died in childbirth. And Van Eyck, ever the master of detail, didn't just leave us guessing. One of the clearest clues is right at their feet. The little dog sitting at the centre of the composition. At first, it looks like a sweet symbol of loyalty. And it is. But it's also more than that. In 15th century art, dogs often appeared at the feet of women on tombs. They were seen as spiritual companions, a kind of guide to the afterlife. And here, the dog quietly reinforces the idea that this woman may no longer be among the living. So, what seems like an innocent domestic scene might actually be something far more haunting. A tribute, wrapped in oil and mystery, to a love touched by loss. And the deeper you look, the more Van Eyck seems to whisper hints through the brushstrokes. At the centre of the back wall, there's a small convex mirror, easy to miss at first, but once you notice it, you can't look away. Around its edge are 10 tiny roundels, showing scenes from the Passion of Christ. But here's the detail that gives you the chills. The 8 images showing Christ's life are positioned on Arnolfini's side, while the 2 that show his death are closest to Costanza. It's the kind of layered symbolism that Van Eyck excelled at. Quiet, deliberate, and deeply personal. These convex mirrors were often tied to themes of mortality, and it's hard to believe that their placement here is anything less than intentional. Modern imaging, yes, we've even x-rayed Van Eyck, shows that elements like the chandelier and the dog weren't originally painted. No underdrawing means they were added later, which supports a heartbreaking possibility. That Costanza passed away after Van Eyck had already started the portrait, and he chose to weave symbols of death and memory into the painting as a tribute. Even the smallest details seem to carry meaning. Look closely behind Costanza's head and you'll see a wooden carving of St. Margaret, the patron saint of pregnancy and childbirth. That carving wasn't part of the original plan either, it was added, likely to gently reinforce the idea that Costanza died giving birth. And then there's the chandelier, easy to overlook but quietly powerful. Above Giovanni's head, the candle is still burning. Above Costanza's, it's gone out. A flicker of life and the silence that follows. All of this, every layer, every hidden symbol, adds up to something truly remarkable. Because beyond the mystery and the emotion, this painting is also a technical masterpiece. If you're ever lucky enough to see it in person at London's National Gallery, you might be surprised by how small it actually is. And yet, it holds so much. Every square inch is filled with intricate, delicate work that reveals just how extraordinary Van Eyck's talent really was. If this painting ever felt strange or eerie to you, hopefully it now feels a little more alive, a little more human, and a whole lot more fascinating. And if this video felt interesting or good to you, we have a good deal more on our channel. A good deal indeed. So slap that like button and subscribe to Art's Wonders, where we wonder about art as much as you do.